yoga lovers! Welcome to Talk Yoga to Me. We're thrilled to have you with us today as we dive into all things yoga. Whether you're on the mat, in your car, or just relaxing at home, we're here to chat about poses, philosophies, teaching tips, and so much more. So go ahead, roll out your mat if you can. Take a deep breath and let's get started. Talk yoga to me.
Yoga teachers know that the art of cueing can make or break a class. Clear, concise instructions are key to keeping students safe and helping them understand their bodies better. In this episode, we're going to be breaking down how to improve your cueing skills and communicate more effectively in your classes. So let's reflect on the challenges and successes we've had as teachers cueing our classes, which hopefully is more successes than challenges, but some days it may feel like more of the latter. And how this skill has evolved for us too as our teaching grows and our practice grows as well. So let's start with you, Allison. What is cueing? Just a basic overview, and why is it important as a teacher?
So, cueing at like its most basic forms is how you communicate as a yoga teacher, right? It's the words that you choose to say. It's how you effectively lead your students from one place to the next, and how you can make these little micro adjustments in a pose or in a class to make things make a little bit more sense. I also think cueing has come a really long way with kind of a lot of hands off yoga teaching that we do now. And so cues can be really important to kind of respect your students' privacy too. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And how does cueing affect the interaction of a student in their practice?
So it leads them, right? Like it shows them how to get from one step to the next, and it also shows them a little bit how to adjust what they're doing in a particular pose or transition. Sometimes these can be like physical cues, sometimes they're breath cues, sometimes they're more energetic cues. And so you can really create kind of like a well-rounded communication with your student based on the types of cues that you use, right? And you'll notice some things resonate with some students better than others, based on what you're saying, and it also kind of helps you to fine-tune your own cueing as well, your own communication, right?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Um, what's your process for planning cues before class? Do you plan them?
I used to write out, yeah,
Really?
not like everything, but if I had a particular transition early on in
Mm-hmm.
teaching that I'm trying to work on, I would say it out loud a couple of times, a couple different ways, or even like write it out. But yeah, I think too, your everyone's process is going to be obviously different,
Yeah.
but just practicing however that comes out, whether that be like recording yourself, which we talk about a lot, or like practicing with other teachers or other family members or friends. But really, the more you communicate, the more you try and do it, the better you're able to feel that flow of what you're saying. I think too, going to other people's classes really helps to hear what cues you hear other teachers say and use those in your class if they resonate with you. But also, yeah, be willing to change. You know, if something's not responsive or your students aren't responsive to it, then clearly, you know, you got to change what you said to make it a little more clear.
Yes and no, right? Because sometimes, like, we'll call our right hand all day long our right hand. Somebody's gonna
That's true.
think about their left hand, right? So, not everything with cueing is always on the teacher, too. Um, and sometimes it's fun to just, like, it's not that serious, right? Like, we can laugh about these things a little bit as they happen, and usually people will catch themselves I do it too. Even as a student, I mix things up all the time. I'm like, well, I thought you were gonna say, so I just went ahead and, you know what I mean?
And I kind of love it when there's like, I recently had one student who was turning the wrong way, right?
Yeah.
And she was just like, she's facing the person right next to her, but she's supposed to be facing the back of someone's head. And she's just like, yeah, you know, this is what I'm doing. And she just went with it. And then on the next side, she just did the same thing with the partner on the other side of her.
Which is so cool because you get one of two things, right? Either the person gets there and they're like, they look around and they're like, y'all are doing it wrong. And then they switch real quick, or they stay and they're like, it's okay, I'll just do it on the other side the next time, right?
Cool and confident. You
Yeah.
know, just like, yeah, I'm meant to do this.
Not everything with cueing has to be fixed, right? We can kind of let people do their own things from time to time.
Very true.
So, you do rehearse your cues in your head, or do you rehearse your cues in your head before classes, or just in general for kind of like, I'm going to keep calling it a teacher toolbox. So that was the term that I used a lot at our last YTT that we did. And so now it's my thing that I say. It's my teacher toolbox.
Yeah, they're there for you when you need them, you know? I think rehearsing in my head is probably what I do the most, like rather than writing it out.
Yeah.
And sometimes too, it's like I think the most tense to go to the end of the class, but at the end of the class, whenever everyone's in Shavasana and you're about to cue them back, I really rehearse that a lot in my head before, like in those couple of minutes when everyone's lying down, because I think that can be a very abrupt time if you're not quite sure where you're going. So that's a time when I rehearse within the class, but definitely rehearsing before as well.
Yeah.
Like, if there's a new transition I'm trying to work on, or if I've come up with a little meditation I want to do at the beginning or end of class, kind of rehearsing what that's going to sound like.
When you rehearse it in your head, does it always translate to what you thought?
No.
I was just thinking about like us right here, right now, you know, just a few minutes ago when we were practicing things, and how we do rehearse verbiage we want to use, and then what we rehearse versus how we think it's going to sound versus how it comes out now. Same.
So different.
Yeah,
same.
I meant same.
same as in class.
For here as it is in a yoga class, right?
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah,
sure.
and that's okay, right? What, like, how do you handle that when you're like, oh, that didn't sound like what I meant?
Yeah, you just gotta keep going.
I love that.
Just like here, you just gotta keep going.
Yeah, just go with the flow, right?
No cuts in class.
Oh my gosh, no, you stick with what you said. I've made a lot of word mistakes before.
Just committing to it, for sure. And getting into it a little bit deeper, how do you make sure that your cues are clear and understandable?
So we talk a little bit about how, like, you know, you can say right hand all you want and somebody's going to raise their left hand and those things happen. But that's not to say that the majority of people don't follow your cues. So I always, what's it called? Observe the room as I'm cueing things, and you can tell when you've said something that confuses somebody, right? So that's definitely something that I look for. I'm also always cueing typically from like the ground up. So it's like, what are we doing at the feet first? Then how are the legs following? Then what are the hips doing to match and support the legs, right? So we're building from the ground up always when we're talking about physical cues. I had something else, like it literally just left my brain that I wanted to say, but usually observing the room. I do practice some of my cues on myself when I'm practicing at home, especially if they're tricky. Like, what are you really focusing on? What's really the purpose of this transition? And what do you need to say the most? And then, also with cueing, we talked about it being like communication. And with communication, there's what you want to say, there's how you say it. There's if somebody heard it and how they understood it too. So I'm guilty as any other yoga teacher of being like, lift your shoulder above your elbow. And what I really meant was, or lift your shoulder above your hand. And I'm like, oh no, this is this body part. This is going up. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, I always observe the room because I'm like, did I mess that up or did you guys mess that up? And it's usually something that, I don't know, I laugh when I make mistakes like that in a class. I'm like, oh, haha, thanks guys, got me back on track. Let's keep going.
And that brevity can help though, especially whenever people, maybe are in a challenging pose and they see like we're struggling a little bit too. Like this isn't an easy thing. It's a practice for a reason.
Yeah.
But yeah, cueing from where people are and like observing them can be super helpful to know if like immediate feedback if they get what you're saying, but also gotta start where they're at.
Yeah.
I mean, if half of them are seated, half of them are laying down, we gotta give different cues for the different situations.
People. Absolutely.
Yeah. And I agree. I stare at my forearm so many times. I'm just like, what are you?
Yeah, I think something about like tabletop gets me every time when I'm like, hey, your wrist's under your shoulders. I always have to be like, your wrist is under your shoulder, kind of thing. Yeah. And I mean, I really do try to keep a lot of my cues very simple too, because I think that I teach mostly vinyasa classes at this little snapshot in time that we're in right now. So I also have to keep my cues very like concise and fluid. And if I'm doing a lot of breath with movement type things, I need to make sure that my cues can match that flow. You know what I mean?
Yeah, you got one breath to say a whole bunch of stuff, so 3 words are going to have to be impactful.
Yes, absolutely. And usually one of those words is breathe.
Yeah,
you know
I mean? In or out. Yeah, that's a lot to fit in.
yeah, seriously. Have you experienced that where you just have students, whether it's your students misunderstanding your cues or you not realizing that you've said the wrong thing? How do you handle students who don't seem to respond to your cues?
It depends on the situation for sure, but like just trying to have fun with it, because as much as we are human and like that we might miscommunicate, they're also human and that they might mishear. So, you get that look of like someone's, looking up at you like, what are we doing? And either reiterating it in a different way can be helpful or just simplifying it.
Yeah, very much.
Especially if you're using the name of a pose, it might be that they're a new student and they just don't know what that word means. And so we can give them physical directions rather than, a name of a pose. Also just like making sure you actually speak, because I have one time just not.
I just thought it and I was confused.
Yeah, I'm up here in Warrior 2 and everyone's still in Down Dog and I'm like, what's going on? Oh, I just didn't say anything.
Oh my goodness.
I guess it was a long day.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever done that before, but I love that. At least not from that drastic of a place. I was like, you guys not watching? Oh my gosh. When you notice that students don't get it, do you change your approach?
Yeah, I do, because even if I said it perfectly, it's not resonating. So it's on, it's on me, and that I don't want them to feel like they're in the wrong.
Yeah, it's nobody's fault. There's no faults in yoga.
Absolutely. That's not, yeah.
There's a fault in that.
In that specific thing. Yeah, there's definitely no fault. I agree.
When do you know to give when do you decide to give individualized attention versus cueing to the class as a whole, or do you prefer one or the other?
I definitely prefer to cue to the class as a whole, because I've only individualized a couple of times in a group class, and I always find that it's kind of like you're digging yourself into a hole. At least it was for me.
Yeah.
And that like I don't have enough time to really ask them for feedback and like, hey Ben, how does it feel if you bend in your knee here or widen your stance? How does that feel? And then they might also, or at least I would as a student, I'd start to feel a little awkward if that much attention was put on me in front of other people. So I've tried to do it to where like I'll look at someone and I'll see, okay, they could widen their stance a little, and then I'll look away from them, kind of intentionally, and just be like, if you're feeling a little imbalanced, widening your stance can give you a better solid foundation.
Okay.
That way
Yeah.
it's not so, it's individualized, but it's not directed at them.
Yeah, that makes sense. And half the time when you do that, other people in the class also move, and they're like, well, I didn't even realize. Because just because you see one that maybe sticks out to you to direct that cue doesn't mean that other people don't need to make that same adjustment, right?
Yeah, true. Yeah. Yeah, what are your...
Sorry, go
no,
ahead.
No, you go for it.
No, go.
So yeah, just there's so many different types of cueing, and obviously verbal is a big part in the way that we speak, but also a visual demonstration. How do you balance the two, and do you like demonstrating in your classes?
So yes and no. Yes and no. I give all sorts of cues in my class. I don't typically do physical, like hands-on adjustment, physical cues, physical touches to change things, but I like to talk about physical activation. So like what muscles are firing versus what's not. When I do demonstrations, I make sure that they are with the flow of class. So I don't typically stop class to show somebody how to do something. I have one example of a demonstration for that I do like to do sometimes, but I usually read the room. But typically when I'm demonstrating, if we're doing a standing class, I'm only demonstrating with my arms. So if we're doing things in Warrior 2 or in High Lunge that are involving our arms, like airplane arms, High Lunge up, Warrior 2 reverse type thing, I only demonstrate with my arms, and I always put my body where people can see it. So, in Warrior 2, you're going to turn sideways. If I know we're going to go to a triangle or a wide-legged something, I'll go walk myself to the other side of the room so that everybody faces me without asking everybody to face me. And the reason I only demonstrate with my arms is because I teach hot yoga, and even if I don't teach hot yoga, I get winded really easily between moving and talking. So getting my legs involved to be like, this is how you do it, and start leading through the whole class and doing the whole thing, I get tired and I get gassed, and I'm like, all right, you guys keep breathing. I'm not going to take any of my own advice for these next 60 minutes. Like, you guys just keep going. And that's typically how I'll visually demonstrate. And then I'll look around to kind of cue. Now I will if it's like I just have to do it for a moment, and I'll be like, this is how you move your leg to get from here to there type thing. But again, I'll always put myself where the majority of students can see me, so I only have to do it once.
That makes it so much more accessible for the teacher, but even more so for the student. I love that you're in their view.
Yeah.
Because like half the class is going to be able to see you if you're in the middle, in the front of class.
Right.
And you're trying to demo something, especially if it's on the first side, like that, and you have new students and they just happen to be on the wrong side of the class. Yeah, dual purpose.
Granted, I'm pretty clumsy and I'm not very graceful, so like I'll do that sometimes, and like I've tripped over the speaker, I've tripped over like the table by the back door type thing, and I'm just like, y'all, we're just doing our best. Like,
ever get kicked in Three-Legged Dog?
No, but I've come really close lots of times, and I'm like, if you guys kick me, I'll learn. It's fine. Like, only need one good kick to not do that again. But I walk backwards a lot when I'm teaching, and I have almost tripped over people, and I'm like, or water bottles or blocks type thing. But
sure. Yeah.
That might be another story for another day. But I typically find that those visual cues where you're demonstrating but can do so in that nice fluid movement work the best, right? Because most of us are visual people. And just because you say something doesn't mean that we're going to get it. But if we see it and we practice in front of mirrors, we're like, I see. You know what I mean? It can be a little bit helpful.
Yeah.
With that there,
And I like to use the mirror to cue for students, like just in simple one is like warrior two, having your
Mm-hmm.
arms or your back arm disappear. Makes you know that you're kind of square.
Yeah.
And using the mirror, if there's mirrors in your studio, that can definitely be helpful.
And I like to always call, I talk to people all the time who like love hate mirrors. So I always like when we reference the mirror or find ways to use it as that tool where it's like, hey, we're not checking out how our hair looks at the moment or how our butt looks in these yoga pants. We are checking out, hey, is our knee tracking over our ankle or is it in or is it out? Am I arching my back a whole lot? Am I supposed to be? Can I engage my core a little bit more? You know what I mean? And reminding people that it is truly a tool you can utilize, and we just have to see past kind of what that like physical aesthetic layer
Yeah.
is.
Yeah, definitely.
Do you have any examples of cues that you've used that didn't go as planned?
Oh man. Yeah, I mean, I'm still working on my cueing of the breath, like really doing like any pranayama. I get a little stressy because I'm
Yeah.
like, I don't want people to be panicked if I'm like cueing them to like box breathe or something and it's way too long for someone. So I think there's always more to learn, but for me, like learning to cue and pranayama is a big thing that I want to be working on. And then kind of switching gears, there's some that I like that have really worked that I've heard you say. And this one's very general, but I think it's important to where people can take it on for their own and feel things very individualized but still be really impactful. As you will say, where can you invite a little ease? Where can you invite a little bit more engagement or activation or
Effort,
effort?
yeah.
Yeah, maybe you can encapsulate.
Yeah.
You say what you usually say because I've botched it, but
No, it's so funny because those two things are so important. Like when you're doing a physical yoga practice, like you don't want to be so tense that like you can't move or you forget to breathe, right? But you also don't want to be so easeful that you're just kind of falling into whatever you're doing, right? So you want that balance. And it's funny because I say that a lot and I mean it because those are two things that you want to happen when you practice. But if I am saying that out loud, it's because I am trying to remember what comes next.
that's so funny. So it's like your filler phrase, and I would never guess that because it always is like right when I need it and such a good reminder.
Or maybe
Those
it's
are
not.
good. Well, not
It's
a
not
filler.
exactly when I forget per
Uh-huh.
se, but maybe I'm like, how long are we supposed? I forgot to count, because sometimes I'll count how long we're gonna stay somewhere. Sometimes I'm like, oh, well, you can't inhale to this next thing, so we're gonna inhale, exhale, inhale, and then move. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's kind of where I add those. So it's actually a dual purpose phrase because it is something that's so important when you're practicing yoga. And it's also something that helps to give me that little extra space to remember where we're going next or to decide how we're getting there, you know?
Another good one for the yoga toolkit.
Yeah, oh my goodness.
There's one thing that I like to do at a lot of the beginning of my classes, and it doesn't always happen, but usually from seated, I'll like get us going with just like inhaling our hands up, exhaling our hands down, and taking that time for them to continue to do it and explain, hey, we're all going to move in a different way. Our breaths are at different paces. So tuning in to syncing our own breath with our own movement and noticing that pace and that timing. And I guess it's kind of part of grounding as well.
Absolutely.
But I enjoy doing that, and I think it's a good way too to check in, like, how's the back feeling, the shoulders before we get really moving big time.
Yeah.
Gives you kind of like a benchmark on your breath, but also how you're feeling.
Yeah, absolutely. one of the things that I always have to be really careful with on cueing is I've I'll catch myself regurgitating cues. Kind of, I don't want to say mindlessly, but sometimes when I'm just in the flow of whatever class is going on, and I told you I sometimes like to create like rocket vinyasas where I'm like inspired, my sequencing is inspired by kind of rocket. And I'll notice that as I'm teaching, and all of a sudden I'll start just regurgitating like cues that I would use in a set sequence type thing. And I'm like, wait, stop. That doesn't apply here. Never mind, take it back. like, and that's something that I always have to be really, really careful with, because I do it with a couple cues that I'll just repeat, and I'm like, that's not what we were doing today, but I guess it's what we're doing right now, so it's fine.
And kind of, yeah, it's hard to, once you get going, you're just like, okay, we're just cueing it out now.
And I tell people all the time, because that 60-minute yoga class that I teach is probably the most amount of talking that I do in a day. I'm just not talking that much. So to talk for 60 minutes straight for me is a huge challenge.
Yeah. And it can be hard too to edit too. I think observing is a good way to know when, hey, we don't need to cue left hip forward, right hip back, because everyone's doing it. And but it's also, when we're new or nervous or tired, we can sometimes fall into just giving them every cue, which is hard to do.
Because we want to be perfect.
Yeah.
And we're like,
true.
I have to do everything perfect all the time. And it's just not, that's just not how you get perfection.
Yeah. How has your cueing evolved for you over time? You're an ERYT 200 plus almost.
Plus almost done with my 300, but...
And you're an educator as well?
Yeah. Cueing has simplified over time, which has been really nice. Because like you were just saying, we think that we have to cue all of the things, and that's very much so how most of us start in the beginning. We want to say everything, and we want to cue every detail of every pose. And I think sometimes that happens to us because it's our job to know every detail of every pose. When we break down poses in YTT and as we're learning them, we know every little thing that's going on. And there's truly so much to cue and correct in every pose that we could write a paragraph about each one, right? But we simply don't have time to do that. So for me, cueing has evolved where I have truly started to simplify it, and I kind of choose my words based on what I see. So if you have a pocket full of cues that you always use in Warrior 2, and then you look around the room and you're like, I got a room full of advanced practitioners today and everybody's in their Warrior 2, I don't need to cue anybody's shoulders over hips type thing because everybody's doing it. It doesn't make sense to say those things.
Yeah.
It's really about keeping your cues simple, observing what you have going on in the room. Also, I think a lot of it's trial and error, right? You're going to try some cues that work, and you're going to try some cues that don't work. And even the cues that don't work, we're going to try them a couple times because did I say it wrong? Was it understood incorrectly? Could I just change something simple? Or is that something that would resonate with somebody else?
Yeah.
You know, so I don't think there's ever necessarily, I won't say never, but before you label a cue as bad, try it a couple of different times in a couple of different classes, a couple different environments, and then decide if it's something that you're gonna, you know?
Yeah, for sure. And I actually would also add to just continue to educate yourself, whether that's exposing yourself to other teachers and their classes, or reading like Light on Yoga or referring other texts. I recently have started using one. I sat in on your YTT with your new group of students about a month ago, and in Warrior 2, there was one in the book which I didn't even really remember, but it's with your front foot ground down on your inner arch of your foot as you reach your glute down or your tailbone down to basically ground down into the foot, but also you're opening this thigh and this knee to stack back over the ankle. Which I've been using in whenever it's a more experienced class and like, hey, everyone knows what we're generally doing here. And I'm still clearly working on simplifying that cue, but I love it because whenever I did it that day and I was practicing with you all, I was like, oh yeah, like it feels totally different, so much more active, getting that active hip opening on the front hip, and that can benefit students who are trying to get to the next level with their practice or just feel more involved in it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I like those cues that are like ground down and root down and engage this, because sometimes what you see at the surface, it looks perfect. You're like, oh, the alignment is great, this is great. But the engagement is such a subtle thing that you can't necessarily see, that knowing those engagement cues and those like rooting cues can be so beneficial to so many different people, because it is more of an energy, like it's more of an engagement than it is a bone alignment thing, if you will, you know?
Yeah, because we can all just stand here in a very calm position and be fine, but if you like really ground down into your feet, like, and lift your quads away from your knees, reach your tailbone down, and your crown of your head high, slightly tuck your chin.
It's like Tadasana versus just standing up. Yeah,
and how many times you say reach your crown of your head high and they're like this, and then tuck your chin.
That's not what I meant.
Yeah. I've been getting that a little bit more recently, but it's fun. It's a check-in too, because it's like, oh, you know, you got to give those paired actions. We're not trying to overextend. We're looking for this kind of middle way. Path.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think that's so important. Do you have any advice that you want to add for what you would maybe tell to new teachers for cueing? Other than all of the things we've just discussed?
Yeah. Well, I think just a basic one of, if you have recently finished your RYT 200 and you have not started teaching yet, just jump into it. Just go for it. Like, go to a community class or whatever, because you have all this knowledge and you obviously did your YTT because you are interested in potentially teaching. And even if you wind up not doing it long term, just jump right in it right off the bat, because it's fresh on your mind. The longer that you wait, the more nervous and second guessing you're going to get into it. So you're already like, you did your final and you taught an hour-long class, maybe a couple within your YTT, depending on your teaching or your school, but like, just go for it.
Just do it.
That's the biggest one.
I love that. Yeah. Just jump right in. All good things.
Yeah, do you have any?
No, I think I'm here with like just keeping things simple, right? Like there's 1,000 cues you get to choose, and just pick the ones that resonate with you and make the most sense to you, and get used to observing. Get used to seeing what's going on, so that we're not talking to whatever I was trying to just say just now.
Yeah, just cueing. Cueing from what you see.
Cueing from what you see. Yeah.
Rather than giving the whole textbook.
Exactly.
That they might not need.
Exactly. So, I mean, we both know cueing is an essential tool for guiding our students to practice. And it takes a lot of time to refine. So be kind to yourself through your cueing journey. And if you're a student, also be kind to your teachers through their cueing journey.
Please.
But honestly, the more you teach, the more comfortable you'll become with finding the right words at the right time. And like Jimmy said, you just have to do it. Just practice. Practice doesn't even have to make perfect. Practice will just add a level of comfort to cueing, if you will. Yeah. So that's what we have for you today. Thank you guys so much for joining us. In our next episode, we're talking about building your student base and how consistency can make or break your success as a yoga teacher. We'll share some personal stories and tips for staying motivated when class numbers are small, and also, celebrate when they're not. So, anyways, we'll see you next time.
Yeah, until next time, guys, take care and thank you for tuning in to Talk Yoga to Me.
Talk yoga to me again soon.
And Talk Yoga to Me again soon.
Bye.
Bye.